Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, IT Cost Control. Thanks for joining the Amalgam Insights channel. I'm joined today here by Jeff Moyer of Valicom.
Hello, everyone. Again, welcome. We appreciate your time today on the IT cost control, the 5 warning signs of fast-growing companies. I'm very excited to present Hyoun Park that will be sharing great information along the lines of expense management within technology to help all of your organizations make better decisions faster. Again, I'm the president and COO of Valicom Corporation, and I'm happy to turn it over to Hyoun.
Terrific. So I'm Hyoun Park, CEO and Principal Analyst of Amalgam Insights. If you've been to any of these webinars before, you probably have an idea of who I am, but just wanted to give you an idea of what we'll be talking about and who we are, so you're not just thinking, hey, who are these guys and why are they telling me this? It turns out that we both have spent a lot of time thinking about how IT is managed in mid-market organizations, as well as breaking points that happen in spend categories, as well in organizations and departments to show when IT starts getting out of control and needs to be managed better. So today, we're going to start by just introducing ourselves, going to talk about some of the challenges of managing what we're calling teenage IT in high-growth environments, areas where IT is just starting to emerge but is still kind of wonky. We're going to talk about how to identify your breaking points in managing IT. We're going to talk about some of the contradictory and odd aspects of this, such as why funding can be an IT challenge. We're going to move into how your 3 options exist of in-house, back-house, and managed services management. And then we're going to give you some key recommendations that you can take home to your organization to make sure that you are doing an optimal job in managing and taking care of your IT environment. So with that, I'll start with myself quickly. I am the founder and principal analyst of Amalgam Insights. We are a research and advisory firm, so you may know about companies like, say, Gartner, Forrester. We do the same type of work, but we are specific to technology consumption management. We look very deeply at the challenges of how you purchase and operationalize technology, and we do this across telecom, network, mobility, data, SaaS, and public cloud. Previous to this, I've been a chief research officer at another analyst firm. I've worked at Bose and Teradyne, actually getting my hands dirty in multi-million-dollar IT budgets. I've worked in political budgets, and I actually started my career as a fantasy baseball prognosticator, creating predictive models for players. So I've been digging into data and finance for quite a while, and now I bring all of what I've learned throughout the past 20-plus years into the technology cost world. And I'm joined here by Jeff. I'll let him quickly introduce himself as well.
Sure. Hello again. My name is Jeff Moyer. I'm the president and COO of Valicom. We are a technology expense management corporation. We are 100% woman-owned. We come with a vast amount of experience and adaptive solutions to any environment. I've been with Valicom for over 11 years now, and prior to my experience here at Valicom, I have spent over 25 years on the the side of IT decisions within manufacturing and healthcare-related organizations. So I'm very pleased today to have this webinar and the audience that we have to share the great information that we have relative to our the information that Hyoun is going to take you through today.
Great, thanks. So here's our caveat, our warning for all of you as we go through this presentation. Both of us have been doing this for decades, so we have a lot of information to share here. What we're going to go through in this presentation is just going to scratch the surface. Please follow up with us afterwards if you have any questions about any of these slides that we're going to be going through. Any of these comments, any of these topics that we have already brought up in the agenda. We welcome your questions, as well as during the webinar itself, we can also take questions and we can we can stop the presentation if we get questions that are appropriate to each part of the section. So please participate. Please talk to us during the webinar. Please talk to us after the webinar. This is a topic that is near and dear to our heart. So with that said, let me start by introducing the challenge that led to this presentation. One of the issues that we have seen in the corporate world is simply that mid-market companies and growth companies are the teenagers of the corporate world. They are trying to get past an environment where they have been led by a single individual, perhaps have gotten up to, call it, 5 to 10 million in revenue, either as a business or as a business unit, and are trying to figure out how to scale. Obviously, to do that, you've got to start building out enterprise capabilities. You have to get past aspects like Maslow's hierarchy and get past the survival to higher levels of organization. You have to think about Dunbar's number. So Dunbar was a scientist who found out that basically your community gets up to about can get up to about 150 people that you talk to on a regular basis before you have to start managing and delegating to a greater degree. These are the types of challenges that mid-market companies are dealing with. And of course, this also reaches out to this also extends to organizations that are, sorry, I'm just getting some comments that the mic is not very strong, so I'm trying to improve the audio right now. I'm just pointing out that there are a lot of business challenges associated with moving to enterprise capabilities in the IT world. So with that, the actual challenge is that we need to find technology challenges. We need to answer technology challenges that require employees to quickly onboard, need to understand how to figure out tech as a force multiplier, something that helps organizations to improve how they do operations and improve employees, be able to create environments where they're able to bring in technology quickly, build and break. They need to rationalize and optimize offerings. So we see a lot of duplication that typically occurs in the business world. And then figure out how to simply do this and rationalize that cost so you don't pay more. All of this is important from a technology challenge perspective. And then that will allow you to actually be able to move on and be able to scale your organization. But it starts with understanding how to manage that technology. So one example of this on the IT side is looking at telecom expense management. Telecom tends to be the highest cost component of IT. Of course, there are other aspects that take up costs as well, servers, software. But at some case, that financial case occurs. So how do we figure out where that financial case starts coming into play? And a couple of ways of thinking about this are to start looking at your organization as well as the types of spend and the types of revenue models that you have. Here are 6 signs that you've reached the breaking point as an organization in trying to manage IT spend. And we'll talk about each of these metrics to a greater extent. But the first is simply $1,000 per employee. Start looking at your cost per employee with the understanding that you need to get to that you need to track the cost per employee. So taking a step back, if you look at the census numbers on an employee basis, average employee in the United States makes about $50,000 a year, maybe $55,000, something like that. The average revenue per employee is closer to $250,000 per year. So you start thinking about the overhead per employee in those terms. You don't want technology to be an overwhelming amount of that cost, because obviously there are all sorts of other things you need to do as well. You need to create product, you need to do research, you have to also manage your finances, you need some sort of plant or operations. Obviously there are all these different areas that go into running your business. But once you start running into cost of $1,000 or more per employee, you start reaching a point where it's a significant cost that you need to manage in your organization. Second, thinking about that the cost, you also need to look at how big your business is, whether it's 50 employees or 10 million in revenue. Those tend to be initial breaking points where your organization is starting to need a formal amount of management for technology, because simply looking at these two bullet points together, you start running into an IT or technology spend environment that is, call it $100,000 a year or more, sometimes significantly more if you're a technology-heavy organization. It's not uncommon to see high-tech companies that are in well into multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars in technology spend at this point, especially if you have, say, a software company or something with significant cloud-based transactions that come into play. So looking at these, you start seeing how big you are as an organization or as a business unit when you start needing better IT management. Next, thinking about uncontrollable peak demand. A lot of us work in retail environments or in other business environments where you may need to solve holiday challenges. So, for instance, when I worked at Bose, obviously we always cared about the Christmas and holiday season. That December was a peak moment for us when we had to really up our throughput to make sure that everything would go through, because any business lost would be a significant impact on our top-line revenues. Fourth, receiving external funding. This is going to be always a big challenge, because often when you raise external funding, there's a very specific reason for it, and if you read these press releases, so many companies say, we are receiving external funding to increase sales and marketing, to increase growth. Obviously, you want to do that, and part of that will always be investing in the technologies that support sales and marketing to optimize their efforts. And it makes no sense to end up raising 10, 15, 20, 30, $50 million if you end up not having the infrastructure to be able to support all of the new employees that you end up bringing into place, as well as supporting the territories that you have in place across that you're seeking to expand into. Fifth point is around the inability to track spend, shadow IT. This is a trend that has taken many forms, whether it be around bring your own device, or around bring your own apps, or bring your own anything at this point, honestly, because consumer technology has become so advanced that it's not uncommon for people to bring their own technology and hope that finance sorts it out later through expense reports and other areas. And then finally, looking at the inability to negotiate contracts. So once you start getting to the point that you are that you have these hundreds of thousands of dollars in cost, you start getting big enough to manage and negotiate business-grade contracts. But how do you do that when you have trouble seeing what you're spending or really being able to wrap your arms around what you're doing? So it becomes important to start managing your technology as an actual business. So
Jeff. I was just going to say, I think that is a great list, and the one thing that I would comment on that list and everything associated with the preparation of getting to those results and getting to the point of, these are warning signs that we need to take action, are really along the lines of assessing the process. The technology that you're managing and trying to control and optimize the expenses accordingly really all revolves around the process. So an assessment of the process that's in place to track and manage those assets for the organization, I think, are critical. So I just wanted to add that point. Thank you.
All right, terrific. Thanks, Jeff. So thinking about some of these metrics, first of all, digging into $1,000 per employee. This is a metric that starts matching up to understanding whether a cost component is getting up to 1% of revenues, which is kind of an alert that happens in the finance perspective. And before I mentioned that the average business in the United States brings in $250,000 or so in revenue per employee, but this range is very different for small companies versus large organizations. For a small startup company, literally a handful of people, this honestly might be closer to $150,000 per employee, basically enough to cover payroll and initial operations, whereas at the large enterprise level, when we're talking about the Fortune 1000, you might be talking about closer to $500,000 per employee in revenues. This is not a fixed number. It should be thought of as more of a range. Apple probably brings in over $2 million per employee, just to show what kind of a crazy company they are. But thinking about when the cost starts really mattering, this should be the starting point for thinking about that $1,000 per employee annual cost. Amalgam's found that in looking at cellular spend, for example, that the average spend that we see for business cell phones tends to be about $75 a month, or $900 a year, just in cell phones alone. And you may have very different experiences, whether you're dealing with, say, very commoditized cell phones that are just being used for straightforward logistics use, or whether they're being used for sales and high data usage environments. So again, it's a range, but think about that $1,000 per employee kind of as a starting point for really needing to manage your IT spend in greater detail across telecom, mobility, software as a service especially. The second piece of this is around 50 employees or 10 million in revenue. This is almost every organization getting to this point is going to start running to the potential to save, I'd estimate, at least $25K a year in potential optimization, and potentially much more, because you've been purchasing your cell phones, your telecom, your apps on an ad hoc basis, and now you are ready to start bringing the spend together and being able to rationalize vendors. For instance, you might have 5 different providers and you really only need 1 or 2 in a specific area. You might find that you've been shutting off cell phones in theory, but you haven't actually turned off the cell phone plan, or you might find that from an app's perspective that there are many licenses that are still popping into your expense accounts and just haven't been tracked because whoever is doing your accounting doesn't have a good idea of how to track something as basic as a Salesforce account or a Dropbox account to a specific employee. So all of these are basically examples of areas where you can start looking for optimization. In addition, just the paperwork and relationships associated with dealing with all of these technology vendors starts taking up significant work time. You're going to find that whether it be an accountant or an IT person or a financial manager or a sourcing manager, they're going to start finding that IT takes up more and more of their time. And frankly, if this is taking up 25% of your finance person's time, yet only this only makes up 1 or 2% of your total spend, and you know that there's that there are savings that are caught up in there, this is going to be an interesting challenge for you. You're going to find there's this optimization opportunity, and there are several different options that we're going to talk about later on how to be able to fix this. But start looking at that quarter FTE area as well. If you have somebody in your organization spending 10 hours a week or more just on IT-related expenses, operations, service orders, disputes, all of the non-technological aspects of managing these relationships, that's a good sign that you may need to start looking for some sort of solution. So next up, we'll also talk about business drivers. So uncontrollable peak demand. I mentioned earlier about the challenges associated with retail as well as other peak unexpected orders challenges that can occur. For instance, in today's world of social media, you can go viral. Although that's become a cliche, what happens if you get 10,000 orders as a result of going viral? You obviously can't simply say, well, my IT budget was X, so we're not going to fulfill the orders. That doesn't make any sense. But by better understanding where your technology spend comes from, you have a better idea of knowing what the cost of technology cost per order is, and making that predictable rather than having to guess what your technology cost associated with supporting peak orders might be. That's very helpful to you as an organization, because that is ultimately how you scale and, again, get past Dunbar's number challenge that I spoke about before, where you have to manage everything individually by yourself. At some point, the decisions have to get past yourself, and you have to create an actual predictable model of operations for your company to grow beyond the constraints of a single CEO or a single manager who has the vision and operational responsibility for the company.
Yeah, this is Jeff again. What I would do, I would inject here that I think that's a really good point, because as you talked about the quarter person's time, and this is absolutely clearly one of those elements within a growing company that, nobody plans on whoever's taking that time to pay attention to the orders, to the managing the invoices, the disputes and whatnot. But the reality of it is those people already have competing work priorities. So somehow it's got to be, try to fit it in. So I think that that's a really good point that you just made.
Thanks. And then the other aspect of receiving external funding. Everybody always celebrates having external funding. It's always a great thing that happens. There's a press release that comes out. Either you've raised an A round or B round, or you've gotten internal funding of, call it hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to be able to pursue a strategic project or business unit. It's always good news to hear that. However, the challenge is that receiving external funding also means that there's a lot of pressure to spend that money either based on a budget or based on a timeline. For instance, if you've raised a Series A round, that's typically supposed to stretch out for another 18 months to 2 years for you to figure out how to expand your operations to X level of growth. So it means that you're supposed to get there. The challenge can be if you don't get to that level in the scheduled time, your funders, your budget holders may be complacent in providing timely follow-up funding. If you get to that 2 years and you haven't gotten to, call it $10 million in sales or whatever the goal is, or if you haven't gotten to a production level product, it can be difficult to get that next round, that extra $1 million that you might need to be able to get there. So it's very exciting to get money on the front end, and then you'll find on the back end that if you are off plan for whatever reason, you've got to start cutting corners. So prepare for that ahead of time. This is one of the areas where IT cost control ends up being very important for fast-growing organizations because this is about dealing with the long slog of actually building the company. You've got to rationalize these costs. You've got to figure out where can I find that extra 50K? Where can I find that extra 100K to keep operations going because we just ran into unexpected delays. So this is an important area and an area I found in the past where startups are able to translate their very tactical IT management strategies into something that keeps the company going for another couple of weeks, another couple of months, while they're dealing with unexpected circumstances. Next up, I also wanted to bring up management challenges as well. The shadow IT challenge as well as the inability to negotiate contracts. Both Jeff and I have spoken a lot in the past about the challenges of bring your own device and related challenges, bring your own phone lines, bring your own apps. This bring your own challenge is really endemic in business organizations, and why shouldn't it be? Because there's a lot of great technology out there, frankly, and it's very easy to be able to buy individual technologies by themselves, bring them into your organization, as well as be able to understand at the end of the day that these technologies provide value. So there are some interesting aspects to the shadow IT topic, though. One of them was brought up several years ago, a lawsuit called Cochran versus Schwann in California, where a lot of line-level managers put a class action lawsuit against their employer, saying that their employer was not paying their cell phone bills, and their cell phone bills were a part of their work technology and work environment. California ruled in favor of the employees, saying, yes, the business has to pay those cell phone bills. And some people who saw this thought, well, this is about a story about mobility in the enterprise. What they missed was that this was actually a much bigger issue, that in California, for instance, this really applies to all technologies, any expenses that an employee has. In theory, the employer is liable for paying for all of that, whether it be apps, whether it be office space, whether it be a rental car. For the aspects of that matter for this presentation, we're going to talk about the IT side. But knowing that all of these IT costs are going to go back into your organization, but not necessarily knowing where they're going into can be a real challenge, because without a real organized method, what are employees going to do? They're going to expense this. They're going to either put this on a corporate credit card or put in an expense report every month or quarter or year. And we're talking about costs that just fly under the radar because they aren't going through IT or your CIO, your IT manager, or even on the finance side, you might have separate line items for departmental operations versus IT. So you need to figure out some way to be able to get all of these costs together across all of your IT areas to be able to manage this correctly. The other side of this is the inability to negotiate contracts. The idea that these contracts, you're not large enough to get good terms compared to your enterprise compatriots, but you're large enough to be able to negotiate past the level of personal contracts. So thinking about how to get to that point, first once you get your arms around these the actual spend, you can start doing some more creative things as well. One of the things I've seen companies do is work together and create a consortium, either a small business consortium of a variety of companies that all negotiate telecom or software contracts together, or or you can join up with existing spending groups that may exist. But to be able to join those, first you have to know what you're doing. So take advantage of the potential to be able to buy in bulk, and those can that can provide a significant savings to your organization as well. So one of the questions I see from the audience is simply about when was that decision rendered in California? I believe it was rendered in, I want to say, 2013 or 2014. So it was about 3 years ago. The bigger picture is that is the court brought up California Labor Code 2802. So that would be the relevant rule to look at. Labor Code 2802 for California. Excuse me. So these are some of the management challenges that we see, and the potential for a better IT management. Based on this, you have 3 options for fixing this. These 3 options are going to vary based on the subject matter expertise you have in hand, or the solutions that you are choosing, or the way that your organization is shaped. One example that I can think of offhand, I can't name who it is, but there's a restaurant chain that I ran into. They have 700 locations, but they have 2 people in IT. And the reason that they have 2 people in IT is obviously they outsource anything that is non-core to them, and they have shaped their IT organization as really a vendor management organization where they have a vast amount of outsourcing. For them, obviously, they are not going to take on IT cost control as an in-house capability. Flip side is in every organization I've ever worked with on the end user side, I have been the telecom cost manager, the apps cost manager, the mobility cost manager. And it's a skill set that I have because I know the data so well, and I've dealt with all of these vendors in the past. But it's a very specific subject that you have to have expertise in to start with. So looking at these 3 options, we're going to talk about first software solution. My recommendation here is if you are looking for some sort of technology to help you, you should definitely go in that direction. I have managed this both out of Excel as well as through software solutions, and I found that using some sort of software solution was vastly preferable because I was spending so much time in Excel going through thousands of line items, trying to find conference calling accounts that have been shut off, pagers that shouldn't have existed because they should have been turned off 10 years ago when we moved towards smartphones, apps that had never been turned off because the employee had left the company years ago and nobody had thought about that one extra app. I've been there, and that's an incredibly challenging way to manage IT because you're looking for everything in $5 or $10 increments, and it's not very scalable. So I definitely recommend moving to an environment where your all of your IT assets and inventory and invoices are all in one place. It makes it significantly easier to be able to challenge and optimize in bulk. But as a mid-market company or as a quickly growing company, you don't have time for an ERP-like or enterprise application implementation. This is the flip side.
Right. Yep. I would also add that the risk of having that individual like yourself, for example, with your vast experience with Excel and spreadsheets, for example, when that person either gets promoted into a different role and leaves that department or leaves the company. A lot of times organizations are stuck with, well, if that particular individual was providing that data and now they're gone and nobody else has that same familiarity. So if you do choose to go the software solution like Hyoun has indicated, then I think that also helps, especially the mid-tier organizations. It helps the consistency of providing that data in the future, regardless of any kind of employee turnover.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing your yourself solution is job security, but it also leads to a lack of transparency. In some ways, you another example, once upon a time, I was using Man, which was the first ERP ever created. I was still using this in the late 2000s, even though this was a program built in Fortran. It's kind of an example of an investment that was made in the past, and then it got to the point where it was a black box for us. It held mission-critical information, and we couldn't move off of it, but we didn't really know how to use it either. This is a similar issue that can come up on the expense side if you have somebody who creates their own spreadsheet, and it might be perfectly designed to how that person works, but not necessarily good for an ongoing business process management. So my recommendation is, if you're going software only, go with a SaaS provider that can support landline, mobility, and apps, as well as something that can be installed quickly. You're not looking for something that takes 6 months to implement. That's not the speed that we work in at this point. Look for something that is relatively light and simple to start with. Frankly, that's the easiest way to get started as a smaller organization or business unit where you know that you have, call it $50,000, $100,000 in savings probably in there. Call it 20% of your IT spend, but you don't have the time to sort it out by yourself. A second option that you have is around getting back office support. So perhaps you might want an application, but you also don't want to deal with some of the internal challenges. Obviously, invoice processing comes up first, but there are a number of other aspects of back office support that also exist, dealing with your service orders, dealing with your payments, dealing with spend allocation. There are solutions that you can purchase as well that deal with this level of outsourcing. They still allow you to make the strategic, the actual decisions and to okay whether an order is being made or not, but they outsource the, call it the mind-numbing aspects of IT management over to an outsourced firm. We at Amalgam find that this is a good option for organizations where the IT, is very strong technically, but does not have a lot of business or vendor management experience. Definitely don't want to get in the business of processing invoices. That's not going to be a very value-added exercise for anybody, quite frankly. And not to mention that along with that invoice processing, the potential to be able to check these invoices, be able to follow up on any major disputes without taking up a gigantic amount of your own time. These are all aspects that you can outsource, and doing a cost-benefit analysis of how much you could potentially save versus the amount of time that you would have to spend internally to do this type of work is an important trade-off to consider in your organization. Great. And then finally, your third option, a full managed services approach. This is a good option if you're, especially if you're starting from scratch. and haven't developed internal technology expense management capabilities, or if you're in an organization where we talked about the quarter FTE, if this is a quarter FTE job or half FTE job, or even a full FTE job in a relatively small organization, that's a whole lot of time to spend. As somebody who used to be a TEM manager, just figuring out how much my time was worth, it was very hard to, I believe, justify the role that I had in an organization where IT costs were less than about $5 million a year. So there's big gaps between your ability to start getting significant savings at, call it, a couple $100,000 per year, and then that $5 million per year area where an internal FTE can make sense. So to better understand how those numbers work, let me break out how that logic works. If you're doing some sort of a technology expense management optimization exercise, you're going to have a year one where you're going to find a whole lot of savings. There are numbers that fly around. Some say 20%. 30% is not uncommon for in a technology environment that has not been optimized in the past. And you see the 30% number, frankly, a whole lot. But I'm going to be very conservative here and call it 20%. Now, it also makes the numbers a little rounder and easier to work with since for this example that I'm using here. So call it a $5 million technology spend that you have. You know, you're going to save 20% in year one, $1 million. You know, for $1 million, you could probably hire 6 people or 10 people. So it's very tempting to say, well, at $5 million, I should just hire 5 people to manage my technology expenses and inventory and make sure, and invoices, and make sure that everything is matched up perfectly. However, that ends up being a big mistake for organizations that go that route, because frankly, the cost savings will start reducing year after year, as they should if you are running an optimized environment where that is clean. Your cost savings will go down year after year to the point where when you reach a steady state, frankly, you're not going to run into gigantic amounts of cost savings. You're just trying to maintain that low baseline that you've already established, and then the savings will be closer to 1 to 2% per year. Although you're still saving that initial $1 million a year that you found in year one, you're going to find, frankly, in your organization that by year 4, year 5, your company takes that for granted and is going to ask, what have you done for me lately? And in that steady state environment, you're only going to be bringing in, you know, call it $50,000, $100,000 a year in savings, and we're talking about a $5 million environment. So the real savings going forward in kind of the steady environment tends to be the real savings tends to be in taken for granted, and then it gets harder to manage multiple employees that are devoted to technology expense management. This is a slightly different situation if you're dealing with a massively growing organization, because the technology spend is changing year after year. It may be doubling or tripling year after year simply to match the existing business challenges that you have. But in that case as well, you want some sort of approach that scales rather than trying to hire a new person each year to also match up with the technology spend that you have, as well as if your technology spend changes. Did you hire the right person for the type of technology spend that you've brought in place? For all of these reasons, it's much easier to do some sort of managed services, at least at an early stage, and then possibly as you grow larger, I would consider getting a dedicated employee to deal with this, as well as to work with the managed services team that may exist in handling your costs. So those are the three options that exist: software, back office management, as well as full management. So based on that, we have a number of recommendations that we're going to bring over to you. Here's what we've mentioned: all the options that you have, the key drivers that lead to the need to do this well. But before I get to recommendations, we have a question about the initial savings, whether they will dissolve or add on as time goes on. Frankly, the initial savings that you have will typically remain in place. It's not that, say, you're going to go from 5 million to 4 million. If you're a steady state organization, a company that is, say, growing, call it 5% a year, like a normal company, those savings that budget will continue to probably remain in place at call it the new 4 million a year, and then possibly call it. So you go from 5 million to 4 million in year one. You may go from 4 million to 3.5, 3.6 million in year two, and then that 3.5 million is your new steady state for your budget in future years. That's what tends to happen. And then, of course, if you significantly add more employees or add new technology, you're going to run into an issue there. But that's the type of issue that comes into place with technology expense after the first couple of years. That's the reality of it. So based on that, let's move on to some of our recommendations. First of all, visibility is extremely important, and this means chasing down all of the places where your technology spend may be, whether that includes your IT technology vendors, of course, but you also need to look at your expense reports. You need to look at operational budgets that exist at a departmental level, and see if they are sneaking in technology spend. And the idea isn't to be punitive or to be controlling to these departments. The goal is simply to be able to have a single view of all the spend that is happening. You're not trying to keep other departments from being productive. You're just trying to improve your own spend environment. If this is really out of control, you might consider doing some sort of IT audit to look at either an inventory or invoice audit to make sure that you have everything in place, as this can be a challenging exercise for organizations where IT spend is completely out of control. So next, what about the technology costs? So thinking about this, it's important to figure out, again, $10 million in revenue or 50 plus employees is where the alarm should be going off in your head. If those are either where you are or where you are planning to get to, just include this line item around technology costs and technology management as one of the additional steps that you're going to have to put into place to have a well-rationalized and well-scaled organization. Telecom will probably jump out of corporate budgets as a line item that is quickly growing if it is not managed. You'll just notice, perhaps if you're looking at your planning and budgeting solution, you'll find this one little line item of telecom that keeps doubling or growing faster than the company as a whole, and it's because you haven't managed it and you need to put additional effort into managing it. So it could be telecommunications, could be software as a service, could be cloud costs, but take a look at how quickly your tech costs grow in comparison to your employee and revenue counts as you continue to grow. And then, frankly, for companies that are starting at this, I recommend a BPO approach. So some of my former colleagues may not like me for that because I am literally saying don't hire my colleagues, start with a BPO approach. But it's just very difficult from a financial perspective to justify, call it $100,000 fully loaded investment in a telecom expert to take care of this problem when you can start with a BPO approach, which for these lower spend categories will be more cost effective. It's probably not going to cost you $100,000 a year to get BPO to manage, call it a $2 or $3 million IT environment, for instance. The numbers are much more in line with your actual IT budget and spend. At the same time, to do this right, the actual challenge of managing a $2 million versus a $5 million environment actually isn't all that different. A $2 million, $5 million, $10 million, oddly enough, it tends to be about the same amount of work once you have figured out how to do this. The difference obviously being the amount of savings that you get, and because of that, because this inflates into a full-time job relatively quickly, I think it's better for organizations to start by figuring out getting how to get started. So really look at either a full managed services or a back office approach as you're starting to take control of these costs. Then finally, don't wait for the perfect moment. I'll be honest, IT expense management, cost management is not a sexy topic. If you ask any controller, any IT manager, where does this fall in your top priorities, it's very hard to make this a top 3 priority, which can mean that you're waiting for this perfect moment where IT expenses just explode and suddenly will become the top priority in your organization. Honestly, that will never happen, or will happen very rarely when costs explode and have gotten to a disastrous point that threaten your company. But rather than wait for IT costs to threaten the existence of your company, start taking a look at this because there's 6-figure savings in doing this exercise and doing it correctly, not because you're trying to figure out when IT becomes the most strategic, not just IT, but specifically IT, invoicing, cost, and dispute management becomes the most important aspect of your company management, because that moment will never truly happen. So these are some of the key aspects that we see in terms of managing costs, managing IT in your organization. With that, we'd also love to take questions from you guys, from the audience, about any aspects of how to get started, how to identify a specific issues that you're looking for, or any other parts of this presentation.
Sure. So that's a great point to just interject here while you're waiting for maybe some questions to come in. I couldn't agree with you more relative to being proactive. A lot of times organizations, will wait, like you say, for the cost to get out of control, or the organization is going through a downturn in revenue and growth, and now they're starting to look at, well, what cost, what expense areas of the organization can we look to cut and be more efficient or optimize? And usually that kind of scenario is done in a very reactive mode, and people make sometimes fast decisions just to get to, to slash costs, like right now, versus going when the company's not in that panic mode and being proactive to take inventory, have a central repository for all technology-related inventory. So it brings the visibility that you're looking for, so you can make those better decisions faster, and it's scalable as the organization changes, kind of expands and contracts accordingly.
Sure. Jeff, just a question I have for you. From a practical perspective, how long does it tend to take for, because you deal with customers that are in this basic size, how long does it take for them to evaluate your solution and then to actually get started? How long does it take to actually do this?
That's a great question. So a lot of times it depends on their sense of urgency, right? How motivated they are. So if it's in a reactive, a lot of times it can be 30 to 60 days from the time people are like, okay, we've got to get a solution in place. We're totally out of control. We don't know what's going on. We've got to reduce some costs. So sometimes it can be 30 to 60 days. Other times it's probably somewhere in the 90 to 120 days, to be honest with you, from the time that people are evaluating what problems or what pain points within the organization that they need to resolve and to provide a solution for, from the time that they evaluate their options, right? Their options, in essence, like you indicated earlier, are really kind of three. Do it internally with my own team and maybe an outside tool. So maybe I just get a tool and use my team. Or maybe I get the tool and I use somebody else's team with my team, kind of a hybrid solution, or I go with the full BPO. So it really, that's kind of the variable in terms of the implementation. But we've seen clients that have been implemented from the time that they've made the decision to move forward within 30 days. Otherwise, the norm seems to be about pretty much 90 days from start to actual implementation to have a complete inventory to start providing that visibility.
Great. And as our viewers are figuring out how to get started and to accelerate the process of getting control of their own IT environment, what can they do to accelerate the implementation? Frankly, whether it's you or whether they're doing it themselves, what are they going to have to what are they going to have to manage and put in place from your experience?
Sure. So great question. A lot of times people think, oh my gosh, even if we decide to move forward, the task of the work involved is overwhelming. It really is not the case, quite frankly. And it is if you do it by yourself without any issues, then you don't know where to start, or it's based on your own personal experience and you're trying to figure it out and kind of reinvent the wheel for the first time. And so a lot of times we have that, we like to start off and load up all the carrier or particular vendor contracts, preload those in the tool with 3 months worth of billing to provide trend points right out of the gate. And a lot of times people say, well, I don't have the time to gather up those invoices, and it's very simple in the sense where people can say, you know what, here's the kind of the access on our behalf. Go to my specific vendors and carriers, go and get those data, go get that data from the portals, populate that data, work with my AP department or IT to get whatever their chart of accounts for cost allocation structure, and put that together. And when you did that, go ahead and come back to me and let me know where we're at. And so a lot of times people think that all the different components to get the inventory, everything loaded, all the contracts loaded per their environment is a tremendous undertaking that they can't wrap their head around. And what I'm here to tell you is usually once they decide that it's an option, that they don't have to do the kind of heavy lifting or the grunt work, that any vendor worth their salt should be able to provide that for them in a very short period of time. All of a sudden you can kind of see, the deep sigh of relief kind of kick in and go, oh, that's great. So this is what a solution starts with, so I can not have to worry about the heavy lifting and go right into making better decisions faster.
Great. Thanks a lot. And it looks like we are just up on time. So thank you so much to all of you for watching this webinar. Again, if you have any questions going forward, we would love to answer them for you. Anything that comes up afterwards, please feel free to email. Please feel free to call us. Feel feel free to tweet us or direct message or whatever works best for you. Thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to showing you more and teaching you more in this series of webinars. Thanks a lot.